right, hello and welcome everybody to another episode of our Puget Systems live Q&A show. I'm excited to have Mr. Noah Kadner, host of the Virtual Production Podcast, author of the Virtual Production Field Guide, and virtual production editor at American Cinematographer magazine. I feel like there's probably a few other titles, some hyphens in there that we could add for you as well. But I'm glad to have you here. Thank you very much, Noah. And I always like to start off, just in case anybody doesn't already know, and maybe if I didn't cover it enough, give us a little introduction about who you are and what you do.
That's basically it. You know, I'm kind of sitting at the nexus of all things virtual production, which for anybody who hasn't heard about it yet is just basically anywhere where there's an intersection of the digital world with the live film production. So it's kind of sweeping the nation, sweeping the world right now.
It is kind of the big thing right now, especially with like The Mandalorian, and I think that's really the big one where people kind of heard the word and what it is and what they're doing with it. But as I recently found out from listening to your podcast, this sort of work, maybe not necessarily named as such, but this sort of stuff has been around for a long time. And that was actually really surprising to me. And I'd like to start with that. What was your first encounter with what eventually became to be called virtual production?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, the first time I saw what would be formalized as virtual production was probably when I saw the movie Avatar, where, you know, they took a pretty good swing at taking digital characters and sort of driving them with I mean, it's interesting because the theme of that movie is all about human beings sort of mentally teleporting themselves into other bodies and driving them around as if they were, you know, as if it was playing a video game. But in order to do that, they literally did that in real life. They took real life actors, covered them in suits with markers, filmed them with special cameras, and that was used to drive the animation. So it looked much more like real live action, even though it was these giant, 10-foot tall blue alien monsters or whatever, or good guys, whatever you want to call them. That was kind of the first time, without even knowing it, because it wasn't even, other than the people in that movie, nobody was using that term quite yet. And it's become popularized only in the last few years because of shows like The Mandalorian, which have really taken that crossover capability to the limit. So.
Yeah, that's cool. I just had a thought too. And now it's gone. I apologize. That happens sometimes.
Lost in the metaverse.
It was because from what I understand is James Cameron actually had the idea for Avatar for a long, long time, but knew that he had to wait for the technology to sort of catch up. And I suppose it's a little interesting that it's been so long since the first one to now they're talking about like a new trilogy coming. And I suppose just offhand, do you think that's because he waited again for technology to sort of catch up?
I think the dude is busy, and I think he was less worried about the technology so much as just coming up with story. I mean, it's funny because people think of James Cameron as a very technical craftsman filmmaker, but if you look at all of his movies, he writes them and he really spends an inordinate amount of time coming up with story and character that you care about. And then he could throw all the bells and whistles he wants versus, you see a lot of movies today where it's all flash and you don't really care what's happening in the story. You're just kind of taking the ride. Mm-hmm. So, I've actually had a chance to talk to some of the folks that are working on that movie now because it's a lot of the same crew.
Okay.
And they're saying, other than the setting, they've made it clear that this time it's kind of focusing more on the ocean world and less on the jungle world. But as far as what they're doing, it's very similar techniques. Like they're pushing the technology further, but the basic concept of how they're making the film is more or less the same. Mm-hmm. So it was really just kind of taking the time to develop the mythology. I mean, the kind of stuff you hopefully dream of doing if you're a filmmaker and making something good.
Sure. I wanted to talk about a little bit about your field guide, the virtual production field guide that you wrote. There's a volume 2 now. I just noticed as I was looking around today. Where did that sort of come from? What was the inspiration there?
So there's a very nice gentleman by the name of Miles Perkins, who is one of the big industry business development folks over at Epic Games, the makers of Unreal Engine, who sought me out due to some stuff I had written for American Cinematographer and just sort of asked if I would be willing to take on this at the time, I mean, the thing is, when we first started this series, Mandalorian was not out yet, and the whole, even just trying to describe to somebody the concept of, we're going to make this big sound stage, we're going to surround it with giant LED screens, and we're going to film visual effect shots live instead of on a green screen. It's like, you just described that to people before that show came out. It was just like, I could sort of see how that works, but I don't think it's possible. It just seems like the technology is not there yet. So
Sure.
the idea was to have that sort of piece ready to go, so that when that show did arrive, there was, some kind of primer on how it was done, essentially. And so, yeah, we got to interview a lot of people that worked on that. We got to interview just people who had been doing various aspects of, all this different ways to do virtual production, and kind of just try and collate in this thing. Because it's one thing that's really cool about, and again, not to sound like an ad for Epic Games, but since it's a gaming company and games are extremely multiplayer right now, the bread and butter of these companies right off the bat is to be very community oriented and crowdsourcing, and have a lot of collaboration across boundaries. So for them, they're very interested in seeing everybody have access to this technology and understand how it works, and they're not about like holding stuff close to the vest. They just want everybody to know everything immediately.
Yeah, which is great. I think it is so cool that Epic is just behind this 100%. I know early on, with like the machinima sort of community, the old school red versus blue and stuff. A lot of that, it felt like you're sort of fitting a square peg into a round hole. You have these interesting tools, but you're totally using them in a way that they never intended. And Unreal is just like, hey, this is great, and we're going to help you guys out. And I think that's just super cool. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, yeah, you talk about prior efforts in this area like that. It's only been in the past, handful of years that the image quality is gotten to the point where it does compete with movies. We were talking about this a little bit before. They just put out this kind of interactive experience called The Matrix Awakens to kind of go with the new movie, and they'd have some shots in that are completely generated, not just computer generated, but generated live, on the fly as you're playing it on the console, like a PlayStation or an Xbox. And there are definitely shots back to back where it cuts from what is live action footage to what is completely computer animated on the actors. And it's hard to tell the difference because the quality of the imagery that's possible delivering is just so high now.
It's amazing. It's so cool. And it's interesting too to note, at the beginning we were saying this sort of work has been around for a long time. And it just occurred to me while we were talking that the way like the Mandalorian style LED volume sort of virtual production isn't that different from how movies were done, where like you'll have a driving scene and the green screen or blue screen behind in the windows. It's either rear projection or even matte paintings in a way could be kind of considered a similar sort of technique that has evolved now into just a digital format. And it's just really neat. I'm shocked and amazed to see how far we've come in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, I mean, Hitchcock was a big proponent of rear projection, where you basically, plunk an actor down in a foreground set, small set, typically driving shots, and then you put a big movie screen behind them, and you project footage, and you refilm that, and you can, it's if it's used sort of judiciously, it can be fairly convincing, and you can do stunts and kind of, I mean, one of the biggest challenges in making a movie is to just get people into a car and drive around the street. It sounds simple because you drive every day, but when you think about all the camera lighting and like just the safety factor, and then on top of all that, just that the actors can focus enough to drive, and that's assuming it's a nice day outside and it's not raining or it's not the sun's about to set or whatever. So to be able to bring that convincingly down into a studio just is hugely advantageous just on many levels. But if you go and look at a lot of those older movies, it's very static because since the camera is rephotographing footage that's already been shot, you're kind of locked into whatever the angle was that the footage was shot in. If you're
Right.
doing a shot where the car is like, a guy's driving the car like this and the street is flashing by in the background, it looks fine. But if you suddenly start moving the camera around, the background will not shift to match, and it'll just look really fake. It'll be very obvious that it's in front of a movie screen. Whereas what's so cool about this latest tech is that the system knows where the camera is as it moves, and since what's in the projection area is live animation and not baked in footage, you can just shift to match, and everything just looks as real as it would if you were filming on a real street. Only you're in total control. So that is just a huge advantage, and I think is what's driving the interest in this. Is just like it takes away a lot of the pain points, brings you back to a very creative, hopefully, and just like straightforward way of filming.
Yeah. Kangaroo Chili on Twitch asks, the Matrix Awakens looks amazing. Can we expect that to be an emerging standard at some point?
So when you're looking at the Matrix Awakens, you're seeing a kind of preview of the next major version of Unreal Engine.
Yeah, it was Unreal 5.
Right, so Unreal 5. So which, again, another interesting thing about Epic is that they're willing to share. I mean, right now there's 3 major versions of the software that you can download and use.
Okay.
There's 2 that are still based on version 4, and then there's 1 that's version 5. And they're very clear, like, don't use version 5 for games yet, because we're still working on improving and all that. But it's like a preview, and that's what they use for the Matrix Awakens. So it will definitely become a standard, because that is essentially the next version of the software and its capabilities. And what they did, they fixed up a lot of stuff and added a lot of new features. But kind of the 2 major ones that you're seeing in that are a greatly accelerated global illumination technology. So like everything is just lit as it is in the real world, with light rays that don't just shine on one thing and stop, but bounce all around, and everything just looks very realistic. And all that is live. Used to be like you could not have that quality of light without needing to render and post. And the other major thing is they figured out some way, I don't even understand, to just render essentially limitless geometry. So when you're looking at the scenes that are set in the city of that experience, it's not just the foreground that's being rendered. It's literally the entire city all at once. And somehow, some magic, some mojo it does to just make everything still play back in real time. I mean, it's basically they broke a lot of the kind of physical rules that seemed like all animation software had been playing by up until now. It's like, you have a limitation in geometry, you have a limitation in lighting quality. They just said, no, you don't. So it's
you don't. Okay. I love how simple that is. No, you don't. No,
exactly.
Not anymore. Oh, that is super cool. So I guess to extend on to that, off of that question, is Unreal going to be the future of Hollywood? Are we going to see that sort of? Is everybody just going to be using Unreal?
I mean, I would almost dare to say it's the present of Hollywood in these kinds of productions. It's interesting too, because it's an ecosystem. A lot of the other apps out there that are built for digital content creation have a kind of place to function alongside Unreal. But Unreal is generally, like, when you're looking at an LED volume running live and shooting in camera visual effects, it's usually Unreal or some flavor of Unreal that's actually doing the heavy lifting. It may be showing models that were built in Maya. It may be showing photogrammetry that was built in, wherever, but what's actually driving the screen is typically Unreal these days. So yeah, I would say it is the current standard for this kind of production.
Wow. I'm curious about some of the limitations. Because it feels like magic, but there has to be some parts of it that don't work quite right. What do you have thoughts on that?
It's funny, because one of the sort of like side hustles that I have is doing integration of systems, because I would say if there's one sort of gotcha of the whole thing, it's that it's very bespoke. Like it's not like you can just run down to like Best Buy and buy a virtual production stage ready to go.
Okay.
It's extremely bespoke. There's a lot of fairly expensive components that are required to make it function. And yeah, I mean, it's once it's all operating and being managed by people who know what they're doing, Yeah, it is absolutely like magic in the moment, and it's magic for the people that count. It's magic for the cinematographer, for the director, for the actors. They don't really care about all that crazy technical wizardry that goes into it.
Right.
You know, it's like I mean, I saw on the verge of the pandemic, I saw Hamilton here in San Francisco.
Oh,
And you know, when they first started, I was really fascinated by all of like the wireless audio that they had, the lighting cues, and you know the way they were like doing cool sort of interesting effects to the sound and the lyrics live. And then after about 10 minutes, I just stopped noticing the tech side and just was caught up in the story, which is kind of the same thing that happens on one of these stages. It's like you walk in there and you're like, oh my God, how is this even possible? And then after a while, you just sort of like transported to wherever, you know, like people like there's a show they're doing right now for Netflix called 1899, a series.
okay.
And it's kind of like a mystery series set on like an ocean liner at the turn of the century. And that was supposed to be all done on location, kind of like a Game of Thrones style, like many countries. Then the pandemic hit and they're like, what are we gonna do? Let's shoot it on an LED volume like Mandalorian, and they did. But even so, they like the people who are on that show say when we're doing a scene where the sea is choppy and we're on the bridge of the ship, even though it's an LED wall and we know we're on dry land, everybody gets seasick. So
Wow.
it just happens.
I mean, that speaks to the reality or the, I suppose, the blurring of that line, like that. Yeah, that's wow.
I mean, it's hard not to. Once it's like you know, it is like the Matrix. Once the screen is completely enveloping your peripheral vision, it's just like your brain just goes, okay, this is reality now. Like there's no longer any hesitation that you're in a box or a soundstage. It's like I'm just wherever, you know, it looks like I am because it looks so real.
It's neat. It's neat that you mentioned Hamilton, because like, as a stage play, I just recently saw a rendition of a Christmas, or not a Christmas story, a Christmas Carol.
Mhm.
Um, and one of the things I noticed was the back. Not I'm terrible with the vocabulary, but the back wall of their stage, I think, was a giant screen.
Mhm.
They were able to change scenes, and the character was walking toward the audience, and it looked like they were walking down a street behind them, and it didn't click to me, but I mean, that right there is a application for a virtual production in a live setting. And just like you were saying with Hamilton, like after a little bit, I didn't even notice it was just a part of the scene, just like anything else. And it definitely helped with the immersion of watching this live production. It was very, very cool.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's again, it's funny because as a filmmaker, or you know, as somebody who's spent, you know, quite a few years interviewing fellow filmmakers and the like for American Cinematographer, I'm very used to dealing with products and companies that are, you know, very bespoke to the movie business, and that's their whole, you know, little niche. Whereas these real time virtual production techniques are, it's like they're made for video games, and
Hmm.
then they're also used in stage, and they're also used in concert, and it's like it's kind of refreshing to finally be working with a product that is, you know, that making movies is kind of the happy accident versus the bread and butter. It's like it's very comforting to know you're working with a company that's making billions on their video games, and then the millions they make or whatever producing movies is just kind of table scraps. So it's like, okay, they're not going to go away anytime soon. I can really lean into this product because it has so much going for it already. Versus like, oh, like this is what camera that all they make like 100 of these in a year. You know, who knows if they're going to be around in 5 years if business doesn't go great. You know, it's interesting to see that.
Yeah, I agree. It is really neat. I'm curious what I also like. So we've kind of touched on the bigger production stuff, the Mandalorian and the Matrix, and some of the bigger Hollywood stuff. What has been some of your experience, and if any interesting applications on a smaller scale? Like, I keep coming back to Matt Workman and the stuff that he's
Mhm.
doing, because I'm endlessly fascinated where this guy started with like some green sheets in his garage kind of thing, and now he's has like a $50,000 volume, but it's still all like green screen and mocap, and now he's like kind of evolved to mocap suits and trackers and
Mhm.
stuff. um I'm curious, just do you have any thoughts or maybe interesting anecdotes on that side of things, the more DIY applications?
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, absolutely. When you look at something like The Mandalorian, you're seeing basically the best and brightest in the industry, and essentially unlimited Disney and Lucasfilm dollars powering a stage that is extremely state of the art. Um, and but yet that technology that's behind it can definitely be scaled down into something that you could have. I mean, I literally have one of these little volumes in my living room on the other side of this wall, and we shoot surprisingly versatile things on it. And I mean, it's nowhere near. I mean, I would say it's probably worth like 1/50th of the cost of the stage that Mandalorian is shot on. But I mean, the techniques are identical.
Hmm.
It's just everything is scaled. Like for example, when you look at the Mandalorian stage, you're looking at a screen that's 70 feet across, 30 feet tall, big semicircular shape, and it's being powered by you know probably up to 10 computers simultaneously.
Hmm.
Whereas the stage that we have is like 10 feet tall and 16 feet across and is powered by one computer that has to do all the heavy lifting. But since it's a flat surface, it's not a big deal. It's only when you get into these crazy curves and like ceilings and even floors that you need like many computers running it. But I mean, you could start even smaller. You could take like a TV you got at big box store for $300, and if you zoom in close enough with your camera, it will cover the edges of the frame, and you can do these kinds of techniques too. You could do it with your phone. I mean, it's like that's what Matt is into even to this day. I mean, the guy could get his hands on any kind of gear he wanted, but he's still using iPhone because he's very to the DIY aspects of it. So yeah, there's plenty of room to play in a extremely scalable sandbox.
Yeah, I'm I have, I mean, maybe this is just my own fault, but I'm excited to see more of that side of things, of that sort of DIY garage style. Um, Again, it just throws me back to the early machinima days of red versus
Mhm.
blue and things like that, where people are taking these tools and manipulating them to great effect, beyond what they were originally designed for. And it's less so now because Epic is really pushing hard on this side of they want people to use Unreal Engine in this way, and they're very supportive of it. And I'm really excited to see more of what people do with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like any tech in the movie business. Uh, Digital cameras kind of hit the scene in the early 2000s around then,
Mhm.
and there were some fairly low end cameras that were shooting to DV tape that were pretty good. They were still standard definition, but and you could get some in 24p, and so they were nice. But I mean, as far as like if you were filming a movie with digital cameras, you were like George Lucas shooting with state of the art Sony cameras that were huge and covered in cables and were worth you couldn't even buy them because they were rental only. But if you could, they were
Wow.
worth like a couple $100,000. And now you can do that quality with your phone. So I mean, it's like everything as it proliferates becomes more accessible, and I think that will happen with this tech fairly quickly because the components that are required there's just nothing. There's nothing overly unique or exotic about it. It's just understanding how they fit together and it's kind of making it work, which is I think the challenge for most these days is coming up to speed on that. But we've been helping a lot of more modest setups like schools. I mean,
Mhm.
I'm very into helping film schools to get up to speed because I just feel like there's a huge opportunity for graduates that have even the slightest exposure to this stuff versus none whatsoever. So I'm just
Mhm.
like pushing every film school I can find to get up to speed.
Oh,
And
that's
we've done
good.
it. Yeah, and we've done a couple that are very modest, but are more than enough for them to teach the workflow and experiment, which I think is really key right now.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to touch on. Has it been difficult to kind of get to, I suppose, convince these schools or to jump onto this, or
No, it just depends. I mean, what I've discovered is it's really ironically, it's about education. Film schools. I think film schools in general they are very used to teaching their curriculum, and they may
Mhm.
not have the time necessarily to jump off and see what is pushing the state of the art every second. And so I've found that when we've done a presentation to a school, it's usually like, oh, they've heard of this, but they haven't really seen it in action. They don't quite, are completely aware of how it all works. And once they do, it's like everybody's like, oh yeah, we want this like yesterday. Like we need this. Like why don't we have this kind of thing? So yeah, I think it's like anything else. It's just awareness. I mean, the thing is that you're seeing this now in more and more shows, but you just don't even realize it because it looks so realistic. It just doesn't draw attention to itself as a technique. It's like it's almost like people are like, oh, nobody's using this. It's like, well, what if I told you this show, this show, this show, this show, this show? Oh, okay, everybody's using this. Like, yeah.
Oh, wow. What are for I guess for the technical aspect of it, what are some of the pain points to getting started with virtual production?
Well, I would say number one is the screens. I mean, the screens aren't even that expensive as a component, but you just need a lot of them.
Okay.
I mean, when you're talking about screens, you're talking about a little half meter by half meter square. I say meters. I don't even know what that is. I guess that's
About a foot and a half?
foot and a half. Yeah, foot and a half square.
Wow.
And you deal with these like tiles, and you just build out any kind of shape you want with them as they connect together. And
Wow.
you can build them as, I mean, it's like Tetris. You can build as tall and many columns, as many rows as you want, and into whatever shape you can imagine. And but when you're dealing with these panels that are maybe $1,000 to $2,000 each for a foot and a half, and then you think about you're going to need 500 square feet of that or more to do a decent sized wall. It's like the cost can go up pretty quick.
Yeah. Wow. All right.
I would say that's the big challenges in the beginning is just to get over that hump.
Yeah, that makes sense because my first thought would have been for myself would have been the like learning side of it, but I mean, there's so much available nowadays. You don't. I suppose that's actually probably the easiest part is learning how to do it and what you need to do. Um, yeah, I guess that's not really actually. I suppose that applies to a lot of different stuff nowadays. Like you can learn just about anything you want to know. Quick little YouTube Google search and you're off to the races. Huh.
Yeah, I've learned. I mean, it's funny because the stage that we ended up building in our house was slated to go down to another studio facility that we work with. And when the pandemic hit, we were just like, oh, why don't we just build it in our house? Because we're never going to go there anymore. So, I kind of had the luck, so to speak, of spending the past year and a half just having this thing in my living room to experiment with every day.
Mm-hmm.
And learned a lot. But yeah, I mean, it's like anything else. It's one of those things that when it's up and operating, everybody is just so jazzed about it because it's just so interesting to see it functional that people are willing to kind of retrain themselves. I mean, I would say the main thing is people who come from a traditional VFX background may be a little bit less accustomed to the sort of like pace of live production.
Okay.
It's like if you're used to, well, it's like if let's say you're used to being like an animator and yes, you have your deadlines, you need to get your shots done, but no one's sitting there in the room most of the time, like saying like, and action, like you're rendering, you're waiting for your things to finish. And when you're done, you turn in your shot and you might, talk to somebody and get some notes back and finesse it. Whereas if you're an animator that's working inside a volume, it's like, and go, and it's like the actors are standing right there waiting for you. So it's like you need those sort of interdisciplinary skills of high sort of like artist side, but also kind of because it takes a special kind of person to be able to respond to the pressures of live production and not sort of like crumble or kind of just not be able to deal with it or enjoy it.
Yeah. Oh, I suppose that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, they're there on the stage with everybody else. Then it's not so much post anymore. It's live production, like you said. Wow.
I mean, camera crews are very accustomed to the idea of like everything has an order. It's like when the shot is going, they're extremely focused and everybody's working on the same thing. Whereas, if you're used to working in post, the pace is a little sort of, asynchronous in a way. It's like things take as long as they need to, and the pressure is not there to like nail it second by second. It's just like get the job done eventually, So it's definitely a slightly different set of skills.
Yeah. Oh, that's neat. Oh, wow. I imagine that's taking some getting used to for some people, for sure.
Well, I've heard of people. There's some retraining. I've heard sort of different experiences between. It sounds. It's from what I gather. It sounds like it's a little bit easier to make the transition for people that might be coming from a live kind of background. Like
Mhm.
a lot of the people that I hear that are operating the volume itself as the shots are going on come from Broadway productions, concerts, where they're very used to like on the second lighting cues and like
Okay.
being just very active, in a completely live environment. Less so for people that are used to working in post, but for people that want to be more involved directly, it's a great deal. So it just depends.
I'm curious, since you've kind of had your fingers into this for quite a while, what are some of the more interesting and lesser known applications for this sort of technology?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, it depends if we're talking about, I mean, LED volumes, definitely it's like sky's the limit. Like anything you could imagine putting in front of a camera, on in any location in any way,
Hmm.
you can pull off. But there's some really like what is that? I forget the name of that show, but there's a show that just came out where it's like the Masked Singer, but it's not just a physical mask.
Oh,
It's like an AR face that
al-
they're doing.
like
They're
alter
doing
ego or something like that.
Yeah,
It's a fully, yeah, it is a fully digital person.
they're
Yeah,
like yeah, it's like a live mocap that they're singing with, and I mean that is like that's kind of mind blowing to me. It's like that's just a completely new way of interacting that just wasn't even possible a couple of years ago.
that's true. Yeah, that is kind of neat. Huh. I'm I'm curious to looking forward. Where this is gonna go. Are we headed toward like fully immersive sort of entertainment, like the Matrix? Do you think there's going to be a little bit more of a mix where it's sort of more augmented reality, interactivity? I'm curious where you think we're headed in the near future.
Well, it's a good question because it's kind of like in a way it's less about where it's possible to go so much as what becomes the consensus, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
Like like right now, if I wanted to, I could go pick up like an Oculus headset and I
Mhm.
would be looking probably at a game that was built in Unreal, and I could interact with it in a very direct experiential way, as opposed to just looking at a computer screen and playing a video game. I would I'd be completely engulfed in a VR headset and kind of really having a sort of out of body experience in a way. So I think it's just a question of which one of these approaches is going to take off, and who is going to make the technology that ultimately becomes the standard.
Mhm.
If it makes any sense, what will be the iPod or the iPhone of this, in 5 years? Is that such a thing? Do a majority of human beings want to be wearing a headset and being cut off from the world? Who knows?
Yeah.
It's going to require some amazing marketing to convince, I think, the average person of that. But then again, if it's so cool and amazing, it could take over overnight. It just
Yeah.
remains to be seen.
That's interesting. It reminds me, I just recently saw it was an interview with Keanu Reeves. It was centered around the trailer that or the Awakens thing that just recently, but he was telling a story about how he was having dinner with a friend of his, and they were talking about his friends' kids, they're teenagers. They hadn't seen the original Matrix, so he's explaining the premise and stuff like that, and the teenager said, "What what does it matter if it's real?"
Right.
And that kind of struck him like you don't care if it's real or not. And she's like, no, well, because like really, what's the difference?
Right.
And I think I wonder if that there's going to be this sort of is it a generational shift? Are we just becoming more accepting of a sort of virtual world? Like, um,
Again, I try not to read the tea leaves too much, but I have a strong sneaking suspicion that for the current generation who just spent like the past year and a half, and God willing, not the next upcoming year, but potentially, doing much of their life virtually, and not just young people, but everybody. I have a feeling we've been primed now to accept pretty much anything.
yeah,
And there will be, it'll probably be it's a quality of experience thing, and not like, oh, it's fake. It's like, well, No, we all collectively as a society have gotten used to that already. So what's the difference? Might as well have like a nicer looking image to look at.
Sure. Yeah. Oh man, that'll be a very just yeah. I don't want to cast my mind too far down that path, but
Limitless possibilities.
well,
Yes.
it does bring up weird questions about like how people interact with each other. Like there's already sort of issues with like social media and whether that presents a false narrative of life in general. And so um are we heading down a path that where we're kind of numbing people out, or we're able to just produce this sort of utopia or this just it seems like it could go in a weird way. And but that's I don't know, that's a weird path to go down.
No. I it's funny. When I look at the movie Ready Player One is like, I think supposed to be set like 30 years in the future, but I feel like we're inches away from that.
Yeah.
All the technology that could make that a possibility is here already.
Mm-hmm.
Really, I think what is going to make a difference is whichever company kind of is able to commercialize it in a way that a majority of people want to embrace. And is the quality of the experience enough? Because I mean, it's like what sounds more cool, going to sit in a theater where you're dodging COVID already anyway with a bunch of strangers to see a 2D image or maybe a 3D image with glasses on or whatever, or like I just get to sit down and chat with Neo all day long about whatever he wants to do, and then we ride off in a car together and blast our way out or something. I mean, like, that sounds like more fun to me. So I mean, I don't know. I guess the question is whether we go down one path or the other. I'm guessing we'll probably go down all of them.
That's all of them. Yeah.
I mean, it's like, is Facebook a beautiful like place for you to look at the fun stuff your friends are doing and keep keep up with old acquaintances, or is it a place to like tear each other down and horribly nasty political discourse? Yes.
Right. It is kind of both. It'll just be however people use the tools, and like I think you mentioned, like commercialize it, make it palatable to a broad spectrum of people, because it does feel very niche right now. Like VR, there hasn't been the big hook yet that gets everybody involved. And yeah, I think that is going to be the big hurdle, is what is it that's going to capture everybody's attention.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. The tech, I think, is there. Like, I was listening to a podcast a couple of weeks ago, one of my favorite ones, Business Wars, that was all about the iPhone versus BlackBerry. Most people, they're like, "What's a BlackBerry?" But it's funny. You listen to it and you realize, like, that was the standard. It was like, business people need this because they need email. They can't afford to be without their email. And then it's like, okay, that was basically so they was like, they were selling millions of those phones a year to business people. And then it's like, well, what do phones today sell? It's like in the billions, because they do anything essentially that you want. Yeah. So I feel like we're on the precipice of that again, that we go from what is a niche, because I mean, if you were really into VR, there have been very viable technologies you could be playing with for 5+ years easily. Mm-hmm. Does the average person that's not super, into tech stuff care? Probably not, because it's too fiddly, or it's not something anybody else has. So what do they care? But that moment where we get over that hump is very close, I feel.
Yeah. I think this is a little off topic, but I think augmented reality is going to be the first real breakthrough. Somebody like Apple, let's be real, it's probably going to be Apple will come out with some really cool glasses, and it will be a very smooth and easy transition from that to a fully immersive virtual experience.
It's just the experience. It is the experience. Yeah. Whoever does it. Like, I mean, when you play with these things now, it is very fiddly. Mm-hmm. Just getting it. Like, I mean, I had an HTC Vive headset, which is super cool, but oh my God, it took me like 2 days, and I'm a pretty technical person. It took me 2 days to really get it operating properly. Like, I had to keep updating, and then there was like, now you need to do this firmware, and your lighthouses are in the wrong. But it was just like, and when it was finally running, it was great. But I'm like, is the average human being that's not super committed to tech like I am gonna go through all this trouble? No, of course not. So yeah, I mean, somebody needs to just boil it down to, I mean, you pick up a phone right now and it's just boom, you touch it and it just works. There's not like, You don't have to spend like 20 minutes. And that was the same with the BlackBerry. You know, again, it was like just to make it give you email. It was like you had to sign up on this website, and then you had to like okay all this stuff, and then you had to call the phone company. And it was just like, why? I mean, you know, all that's just got to go away, and it will. I mean, it's inevitable. So
yeah. I feel like there's more to, and maybe we've had a really good just kind of flow conversation, and I'm curious about some of the other technical aspects that go into virtual production. Like you mentioned, animators right there on the stage doing, they're able to manipulate the environment live. They can move a box or, you know, rocks and things like that. What are some of the other things that go along with virtual productions that are changing how films are being made?
So I think the main one is really just the concept of having things that used to be relegated to after filming happening now beforehand. Because it's like when you're looking at The Mandalorian, you're seeing finished visual effects shots, which in the past would have been like, if you look at, I mean, if you watch any of the Star Wars prequels and compare that to any episode of The Mandalorian, you can totally see how things look different.
Sure.
Because in the Star Wars prequels, everything was filmed with minimal foreground set pieces and just ginormous green screens. And so, you know, the vast majority of the environments that are in the finished film were put in carefully in post-production when the actors had long gone home. And yet when you look at The Mandalorian, it's like everything you're seeing in the frame for the most part was there live on the day, and the actors were, you know, could react to it. The cinematographer could light to it. The camera operator could frame for it. And just everything just feels just that much more tactile and real. And so having that mentality of all the stuff you're used to doing after the fact happening before you get to the shoot day is really the big challenge. Just having all that, you know, like if you want it to be the bridge of a spaceship, it's got to be built, everything ready to go for the camera before you show up with your camera, and not, you know, later and fix it up on a green screen and do whatever you need to do to make. It's like the decision making needs to happen earlier, much earlier. So I think that's probably one of the biggest sort of things to get your head around for this stuff, is just like that prep. That's different.
Has this made it easier? Is it faster now than, or?
No, it can be, because you know, it's a lot simpler to get into post-production with essentially finished shots than having just like miles of green screen and sort of like making it up as you go. But I would say more than it being faster, it's far more creatively fulfilling. Like when shows are working on these stages, it's like, it's the feedback I get from anybody that's filmed on one of these is just like, this is just so much more creatively stimulating and fulfilling, because it's like there's less time sort of trying to convince each other what it is you're trying to produce, because everybody can just see it. It's not like, oh, where that plus is over there, that's going to be this crazy cool monster, and then right over there where that beanbag is, you know, that's this incredible vista out of the spaceship window that you're supposed to be blown away by. You can play all that, right? And they're just like, sure, you know, versus like it's just there because we already built it.
Yeah, that actually, I think it was on your podcast, there was a director, I think it was a director who was fairly resistant to, like they had a screen, like you could walk around and see basically what the shot was going to look like. And he was kind of resistant to it until somebody was like, no, come here, look at this. And it just like completely changed their mind of how it was. And it was one of the earlier episodes. I wish I could recall better now, but I think that kind of plays into what you were saying. It's you can see there's less, I suppose, less distance between what they see in their head versus what's actually being filmed. And that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's extremely, I think it's extremely frustrating on some levels to do a movie that's got just miles of green screen, because you know, it's like you kind of walk away from the day not really certain as to what you got.
Sure.
You know, it's like, well, we lit the foregrounds really nice. The blue screen was perfectly evenly lit, and I think it's going to composite great. What it's going to look like, I have no idea. You know, versus like, well, that looked awesome. Like we filmed everything that's just right there in front of the camera, and we're done. You know, so it's just. I mean, film crews don't get pulled a lot for their creative expression and level of satisfaction. But I can't imagine there are too many that are working on these productions that don't feel like it's just way more creatively fulfilling to see everything come together on the day instead of not really ever seeing it until they're watching it in theater, and it's like, oh darn, that's what it's going to look like. I would have changed what I was lighting if I'd known that. I guess it's too late now.
Right. I wonder too. So a lot of this centers around the actual production, like the film making. I'm curious. Is this also going to change how we consume content, and then by extension, is the content itself going to change as well? Because like right now, it's fairly passive. We're watching it, and it just happens. I wonder if these are headed toward sort of more interactive storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, I always have this dream that someone's gonna basically remake Star Wars where like I'm just like sitting with them the whole time, and I'm talking. I mean, they kind of have. There's some rudimentary. Well, I shouldn't say rudimentary. There are some very nicely built VR experiences that ILM X Lab has made that get you into that zone a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You're still very aware that you're looking at a great looking video game, but there are moments where they're like, oh, I really feel like I'm standing next to this person in real life. But if they could take that a few notches forward in terms of development, I think we'll get to a point where, yeah, people are just going to experience these stories in a whole new way. And I mean, if you're owning theater stock right now, you might want to consider divesting, because I love the experience in the theater, but I think there's going to come a hard stop moment where theaters will feel hopelessly old fashioned.
Yeah.
Based on what's possible, and you'll still have that very collective experience. Like anybody who's gone to like a concert in Fortnite, for example, will tell you that's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like it's very different from sitting in a movie theater and watching a movie with a bunch of strangers kind of laughing along with you or cheering, whatever. But it's in some ways a more interesting experience. So I mean, there are like, when I was a kid, we had like arcades. That was like a fun collective thing, and those are just gone.
Yeah.
You once in a while you might see something, some old school arcade still operating somewhere, like an old Chuck E. Cheese's or whatever. But I mean, that used to be it. There was like video. I mean, you go to any 7-Eleven, there are just video games everywhere.
Yeah.
So it's like, I mean, that will happen to theaters. I mean, like it or not, there will just come a moment where the alternative experience is so amazing that it'll be hard to convince people to want to have a passive experience, because it's just, the alternative is so much more interesting to look at.
Yeah. I wonder too about like sort of interactive, where you have things like Netflix's Bandersnatch, right? It was kind of a choose your own adventure sort of thing, and I wonder if that'll be, we'll see more of that sort of style, especially with things like metahumans, where you could potentially have one person be everyone in your movie, or no one, really. I don't know, and that's a whole nother topic too, is like virtual actors. That's kind of a cool thing.
Yeah, I know there's a couple of talent agencies that are starting to specialize in the area of likeness licensing.
Mm-hmm.
Where they're essentially taking the face of an actor and their visage, their stature, and essentially offering that as a, something you would purchase and use, like as if it were a prop or a costume. As kind of creepy as it sounds in some ways, it's like, actors may ultimately end up with a much longer career trajectory, because if you've seen some of the deep fake stuff that's been going on, it's only getting better and better exponentially. I know that I know there's several projects in the works right now that are going to tap into that, where an actor is, I mean, even the Marvel movies, you see there's a lot of scenes where they have like Robert Downey Jr. playing himself much younger, or Michael Douglas playing himself much younger, or Samuel Jackson playing himself much younger, and it's just that will continue to get to a point where they don't even need to bother to show up on the set anymore. A stunt person plays their physical actions, and then they just overlay their performance as if it were, some kind of AR
Really good.
projection. But yeah.
It's neat. I did see. Oh, excuse me. I did see recently a company was offering a couple $100,000 for to basically purchase someone's face or their
Mhm.
likeness in perpetuity. Like, we are going to own your look forever, and that's kind of weird,
Yeah, I mean, and I feel like that's kind of an odd approach because if it's unless it's somebody well known, like I could understand like, oh, I want to have Brad Pitt in my movie.
right?
I don't want to pay his fee to actually show up, but can I just license him to be in the background of a shot for a couple $1,000s? Sure, why not?
Yeah.
Um, versus like a person who's not very well known. I mean, it's very easy to just generate a human looking face
Oh,
that
sure.
is kind of a generic face. That's very easy to do. So I don't know. I mean, I'm also seeing that there are many business propositions out there that people are trying out, and some of them stick, and some of them go nowhere. But I think kind of anything is possible right now.
It is. We are in some very exciting times. I think this is just super cool. We're all the all these different technologies are kind of just floating around each other, and it's just waiting for some catalyst to really draw them all together. Because you have stuff like the metahumans, where these are, it's like AI generated faces and people, and you have enough of a technology for, I mean, there's a website that's like, this person is fake or something like that, and it
Mhm.
generates AI generated images, and that could be a real person. And it's shocking almost. And you have AI writing scripts, you have AI editing, um, and it'd be really neat to just see like a fully AI generated movie. Everything from the script to the editing to the people, the sound, everything. It'd be very,
Well,
oh man.
yeah, and if you think about it, we're halfway there already because I mean, it's no secret that streamers like Netflix will oftentimes make movies based on very sophisticated watching habits of the viewers, and it's like, well, people love this actor, they love this actor, they like this kind of plot. What happens if we plug those elements all together? Will we make a movie that everybody's guaranteed to love? Probably, yeah. I mean, and if you took that a step further and just said like, let's just generate that movie and not even bother to film it because the image quality is so high, and we'll just license the actors that we want to be in there. I mean, it's like, sure.
What a trip. What a trip.
Um,
It's like the perfect rom-com
well, it,
AI,
it could it could be bespoken on the fly. Imagine if it's like, what do you like? I really like this movie, and this movie. Boom, we're going to render this movie for you right now that combines all those elements that no one's ever seen before. It's literally just made for you right now. Like that could be done in 2 or 3 years easily. I could totally see that.
Whoa. Ooh, that's actually a really cool thought. Just an individually bespoke film experience. Like,
And
we've crafted this whole story just for you.
yeah, and you can tell us if halfway through it you're not feeling this one character. Well, we'll just subtly kill them off in the next scene, and you won't have to deal with them anymore. It's like I mean, that's kind of how video games work now. But I mean,
Yeah.
there will come that moment
Oh,
where it kind of converges to a point where, yeah, there will be an indistinguishable feeling between a passive and a interactive experience. Hopefully.
yeah. Oh, I, I, I suppose we kind of just touched on that, but I'm curious if there is anything that you're super excited about in the future, the next few years, like anything in particular, I suppose.
I mean, to me, I want to see this stuff become more accessible, more ubiquitous because,
Hmm.
um, I went to film school right on the tail end of the kind of analog universe where everything was shot on film,
Hmm.
and just to get even the slightest professional looking thing in the can, so to speak, and we called it in the can because there was a film can, literally,
Right.
which nowadays people are just
I
like, well,
love
why,
it.
what's the can? Um, there is no can. But I mean, just the mechanism that was required to get something good looking was so expensive, and so I mean, you had to go to film school because that was the only place you could really even afford to get access to the gear. Whereas now, there's it's just like the bar is almost non-existent. It's like you can make I could easily shoot a movie with a current model phone that would blow away anything I could ever have done in film school based on the gear I had access to, by far. And so just thinking about how those boundaries are kind of continue to come down. And I want to see them come down for this stuff too, because it is just super fun to film, when it's all operating, and it's like, wow, we've done, we just in this tiny little lab volume that we have, we've done, I've personally starred in like 6 NYU short films as like the main and only actor, because there's nobody else around to do it except me. So, but it's like I never would have done that even, I could, if you'd told me I was going to be doing that even 2 years ago, I'm like, why would they want me? It's like, well, because you're available. And it's like just being able to have those experiences and work with people that I, never even would have met before has been really creatively stimulating. And so seeing that proliferate and become more accessible, I think is just going to be great. I want to hear new stories. Now there's going to be no barriers to telling them anymore.
Yeah. So, that actually leads to a great another question. Other than your wonderful field guide, what other sort of resources do you know of that other people can use to kind of get them started down this very cool path?
I mean, that's a good question. I probably get that one the most. Is like I'm so interested in this stuff, but I can't even figure out where to start. What would you suggest as kind of a point of entry? And I would say start by messing with Unreal.
Sure.
It's rare that there's yeah, exactly. It's free. Go to Unreal Engine. Is it Unreal Engine or Unreal.com? I think it's just Unreal. But UnrealEngine.com. It's a completely free environment, and if you are really good at Unreal Engine, you can write your own ticket. You could be making video games, you could be doing stage shows, you could be doing TV, you could be doing film, and just by saying I'm very good at Unreal, you will get hired, because there's a big shortage right now in people that have mastered that software, but who are also interested in making movies. Most people who know it are happily working away in video games and have no interest in going to movies because it's an easy gig, or it's not an easy gig, but it's a gig they're into. So that'd be my first step one. If you're into this, is learn that software, or at least familiarize yourself.
Mm-hmm. Anything else?
I mean that, and I mean most of the stuff I've learned is like YouTube searches you cannot go wrong. There's a lot of, I guess I find that fascinating, because again, when I was starting out in film school, there wasn't a lot of information to be accessed. The internet was very basic at the time, and I'm making myself sound like I'm a million years older. We're talking around the turn of the century now. There's not a lot of information. I mean, I would end up going and buying a lot of books just to understand a lot of this stuff. But now, and this information had a cost. Whereas now I see a lot of availability of really very qualified and experienced people just giving it away just because there's just a tendency to want to share this stuff, or whatever. Maybe they're trying to build their own audience and make a little advertiser money or whatever. But I mean, it's very easy to find this info, and it's very hyper focused on the stuff you're looking for. So there's that. Yeah, Epic has a ton of learning
That's true.
resources, and yeah, follow me on LinkedIn. You can't go wrong with that. I'm
there you go. Yeah, actually, here I'll post a link to their Learn Unreal Engine from the people who make Unreal Engine. Oh, I just shrunk myself by accident. I hit the wrong valve on my phone.
I know the feeling.
Whoops. Man, I'm really excited to see more of what people do with this stuff, because I feel like it could go so far beyond just filmmaking, and it's weird because I find myself in a position of where I'm not knowledgeable enough to even ask the right questions to know, or to even imagine what could be done with this stuff. But that kind of is exciting too, because then I get to be surprised by the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, it's very, I mean, I knew nothing. I other than having some awareness of these techniques in terms of post production and my writing. I had very little hands-on experience until a few years ago. And so, and it's a good time to get into it, I think, because there aren't that many people. Because I mean, it's like you're talking about almost like a complete reinvention of filmmaking that's happened in the past couple of years. So I mean, it's like if you're interested in this stuff right now, you're at the ground floor. It's a great time to get started because the idea of a veteran in this stuff is like a person who's done it a couple of times. So I mean, the entry bar is lower than it's ever going to be.
Yeah, which is great because I think when people who come into especially filmmaking, I feel like has a somewhat rigid sort of structure to it. There's these established rules. We film things this way. We have storytelling that goes, these certain arcs and certain touch points it's just the way it's always been done. And with these tools being very, very accessible, it allows people to jump into who don't care about the rules. I'm going to try this thing because nobody ever told me that I couldn't. And it's very exciting.
Yeah, no, there are really no boundaries to what is possible. And, hopefully that will enable more voices hopefully we're in a time where people embrace that as much as possible. I mean, I think you're definitely seeing that. You see a lot of diverse voices making these incredibly ambitious movies just because, the tech part is kind of sorted. It's not like, I mean, I think, George Lucas took a huge leap forward in Star Wars, the original one, just because he managed to put together a bunch of technologies that no one had really ever harnessed in such a way before. And if he weren't such a technical person, he probably wouldn't have. His technical prowess was as much as his story sense to make that happen. Whereas nowadays, I'm seeing movies that are very technically complex being tackled by not untechnical people, because most filmmakers are very technical to begin with, but people you wouldn't necessarily think would be coming from an interest in that, because all of that stuff is just sorted out and they can just focus on, hopefully crafting an interesting story in front of the camera.
Right. Oh, so cool. I love it. This is really cool. Man, I wish we had a little bit more time. We are a little bit over our hour, so I'm gonna have to wrap it up. But thank you so much. This has been just fascinating. I love this part of my job so much. I get to a little peek behind the curtain. I get to offer that to other people too. And man, every day, every time I do this, it's something new, something so just mind-blowing and exciting. And so thank you so much for being here today, Noah. This was wonderful.
My pleasure. Oh, and I should throw a shout out.
Yes. I was about to ask.
One of the things that makes my life very easy, and then this is going to sound like an advertisement right now, but it's the truth. I happen to have one of your systems on our stage, and it's such a potent little beast, but it runs without making any sounds, which is, as anybody who's a filmmaker could tell you, is very key. So I couldn't be happier with having the excess power we need to make these crazy setups in virtual production, but it doesn't. I'm not hearing a fan blow nonstop in the middle of the take, because that kind of ruins your day. If it's like you're doing some amazing dramatic scene and all of a sudden you hear the roar, this is very happy with that.
Awesome. Well, thanks. Actually, that before we go, is there anything of yours that our audience can go and see? Something that you've made that you've played around with your system and the volume you have at home?
Where is that? That's a good question. I think if you follow me on LinkedIn, you can see a bunch of behind the scenes stuff that we've shot. I'm bummed I'm not allowed to show any of these NYU films that we did, because there's some privacy issues around the student work they do. But it's a lot of fun, and the more, I think anybody that's been exposed to this stuff will say the same, that it really is kind of a huge leap forward in terms of just job satisfaction in the filmmaking world.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you again for joining us, taking time out of the day to talk with us about this. I'm sure we could go on and on. And actually, we'll probably have you on again, because things are going to change. Things are changing fast, and
big time.
There'll definitely be more to talk about. So thank you again. And I would like to thank the audience as well for joining us. We do this on Wednesdays, most Wednesdays, barring unforeseen circumstances. We like to bring in external experts like Noah on, and we also have a round, sort of a potpourri of our own internal experts on as well. Wednesdays, 1 p.m. Pacific. And actually next week, we're having our president, John Bach, on to talk about just wrapping up the year and how things have gone and where things are going. So make sure you mark your calendars for that every Wednesday, 1 p.m. Pacific, and we'll see you all next time.
Thanks again.